What's up everybody, this is your lower class hero. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to use Tabletop Simulator. So after you have purchased Tabletop Simulator from the Steam store, installed it, and launched your game, this is the main menu that you're going to see. Here you have two options for getting into a game. The first one is Join. This is going to let you search for and find and join a game in session. The other one is Create. Under Create you have three options. Hot Seat is to play a game with more than two people, or more than one person, sorry, on the same computer. Multiplayer is going to let you create a server where other people can find underneath Join. You can enter a server name, and then server type. If it's public, anyone can join. Friends means only your friends, Steam friends, can join. And invite means it's invite only. When you have it set to public, you have the option to set a password, and you can always set the max number of players for that server and that game. Lastly, a single player. This is the one that you're going to select if you don't want other people joining you, if you're just going to play a solo game, or if you just want to mess around with TTS on your own. So single player is what we're going to use for this guide. When you get into the game, when you create a game, this is what you're going to see, the game's menu. Here you have Classic, DLC, Workshop, and Save and Load. Classic is pre-built-in games, like checkers, chess, poker, Go. These are just your basic games. They all come with Tabletop Simulator. You just click on it to load that one in. Going back, you have DLC. These are games that are available for purchase from the Steam store, from the Tabletop Simulator page. These are games that Tabletop Simulator has worked with the publisher of the game to create, so they're very faithful recreations of the games. Then you have Save and Load here. This is all your save files of games. You can reload any of those from here. This is also where your autosaves are located. Lastly, we have the Workshop, where we're primarily going to be working from. The Workshop here is going to show all the mods that you have downloaded or subscribed to, as you'll see in a second. You can search through those, click on one to load them up. Browse takes you to the Workshop. So from the Tabletop Simulator Workshop page, there are two ways to find mods. You can search in here for one, or you can type in the URL up here. Now this is important because some mods are private, or you need the link to download them. They will not show up in the search function. So here we'll search for Pokemon Master Trainer, which is a very old game. So here you'll find the search results. And if you click on one, you're going to see a lot of details about it. You have description, discussions, comments, change notes, and lots of other information. Now all you have to do to add this mod to your workshop and your files is click subscribe. Now notice I'm already subscribed to this one, so this button will say subscribe for you if you're not subscribed to it yet. And that's it. Now you can return to your workshop. If we go back into the main games menu, you will now see that workshop mod in your workshop row. You click on that to load it and click load. It's going to load that mod. Some take longer than others depending on how intensive the assets are and how many assets are in that mod. But now you are in the game. And for your basic camera controls, it's holding down the right mouse button. It allows you to rotate. Your scroll wheel zooms in and out. And that is it for loading a mod. So for the rest of this guide, this tutorial, we're just going to use a basic table here with a few objects I've already loaded in. Now there are many different object types in Tabletop Simulator. There's a chess piece, we have dice, chips, figures, and more. They're all going to act a little bit differently. We'll go over the basic controls first. Now to select objects, there's two ways you can do it. Click and drag, and that will select everything inside the drag box. You can also hold Control and left-click an object. You'll know it's selected when it's highlighted. You can keep selecting multiple objects with the Control key. To deselect them, just click anywhere on the table or anywhere off in space. For the plus and minus buttons, these will make the object smaller or bigger. So if you hover over an object and hold the left mouse button, you will pick it up and can move it around. If you also hold the right mouse button down, you will move it along the surface, and that will cause collisions. You can also hold R to raise it up higher, and you can hold Alt when you're hovering over it to zoom in on it. Press F to flip it, You can also use the Q and the E keys or your mouse wheel to rotate certain objects. Now for rotation and lift height, you have options up here. This changes how far or how many degrees the object rotates each time you give it the rotate command. Lift height changes how high off the table it defaults to lifting it. Now I mentioned there are many different object types in Tabletop Simulator, and that is important for even the basic controls, because as you'll see, some objects interact differently. So for example, we have bags and decks of cards. If you drag off of them, you will pull an object from them. This could be the top of the deck, middle, bottom, random, or for bags, it could be the first in, last in, or random. Just depends on the bag or the deck's settings. To put it back, we'll just lift it back up, put our mouse over the object, and let go. With cards, another thing that we can do is we can peek at them. So if you hold Alt, that zooms in on the object, like it will for anything. With cards, you can also hold Shift, and you can peek at the other side of the card. And this does so without showing everyone else at the table what it is. Cards and certain objects can also go into what's called your hand. So every player is seated by color. So I'm over here in the white seat. And if I put this into this zone here that is invisible, that's going to add it to my hand. Now the great thing about hands for card games or any other game where you have to have a hand of something is it will always be down here at the bottom of your screen. And you can manipulate it and see it right from there. You don't have to go back to where it physically is on the table. I can just pull it out of my hand here. Having it in your hand is also going to default hide it from other players. So for example, if I put this into my hand, flip it over so that I can see it, I can see that this is the 3 of spades. We'll go over changing colors in a minute, but if I change my color, so I'm not the white player anymore, you notice that if I can see that the white player has a card in their hand, but what it is, I don't know. So go back to our seat. And now I can see it again. And that's how hands work. Now those are your basic commands for manipulating objects in the game. So next we'll go over the tools here. These tools, you can press the F keys on your keyboard, F1, F2, F3, F4, etc. to select them in descending order here. You can also just click on the icon and it will select that tool. You'll notice many of them have a lot of different options. So here the grab tool, this is just your basic cursor. It's going to let you interact with objects. The draw tool, you can choose pen, line, box, or circle. These are just going to draw those things on the surface. You can erase them one by one, or you can erase all, and you can also change the color of what you're drawing. Next up, we have the zone tool. We won't go too heavily into this, but this is to set up zones that are mostly invisible to players, but they change the way objects act in those zones. So a hidden zone is going to hide everything inside that zone. You can change it to only certain players can see, etc. Randomize is a zone where you can put objects in there and automatically randomize them. Hands is what we just saw. You can add additional player hand zones with this. Layout allows you to put objects into that zone and change their layout automatically. Fog of War, we'll get into this more later. But this creates an area where nobody at the table can see except for the GM, and there are different ways to start revealing those areas. Lastly is scripting. This is just a zone purely for functions and commands and scripting to use. Next up, we have the line tool, or the measurement tool. This lets you draw lines and measure them. You can change it to inches, centimeters, or grid units, 2D and 3D. 3D just means that if you measure up an object, say you have a piece of terrain in a miniatures game, it's going to count that vertical distance as well. Then you have auto and free for the modes, and edge and center for the types. These are important because they change the way you're measuring. Free means it's always going to drop it from that where your cursor is at, even if you're on top of an object. Auto means if you're hovering over an object, it's going to measure either from the edge or the center of that object. So now if I hover over this deck of cards, it's going to always measure from the nearest edge. In this mode, you can also hold down Control to just set it to free. And lastly, if you just left click while using this tool, it will ding the table or the object that you're mousing over. And then lastly, we have log and no log. As you'll notice, may have noticed at the bottom here, it's been logging the measurements I've been making. That's what the log tool does, just logs it into chat. Then we have flick. Here you can select a point on the table or an object, hold the mouse button down and pull back, and let go to flick it. Then we have combine. We're not going to get into this tool much here either, but this allows you to combine more than one object so that they are interacted with and manipulated at the same time. And they have different types of joints here. So just as an example, I want this dice and this figure to be linked together. So I'm going to drag from one to the other. Now when I interact with them, they are one and the same. To undo it, click on one of them and drag off onto the table or off into space. Now they're separate again. Next up is the text tool. This is pretty self-explanatory. You click on the surface. You can type in your text there, you change the color, size, or delete it. The gizmo is for precisely manipulating objects, their position, rotation, and their scale. Then we have decal here. I haven't loaded any decals, but if you can load in images as decals, and then you can stamp them around onto the surfaces, and then delete them if you're done with them or don't want them there. Points we're also not going to get into, but this is going to create snap points for objects to snap to. Then you can delete them, and they will be gone. And then lastly, for basic tools and controls, like I said earlier, different objects have different commands and controls that are specific to that object type. So like here we have a set of poker chips. I'm going to drop them onto a single stack. You'll notice now that they're all stacked up nice and neat, and the tooltip also displays the value there of the whole stack. As for chips, cards, as you've already seen, they go back onto the deck. Dice, you can toss them to roll them. You can also hover over them and press the R button as many times as you want, and that rolls them. Most objects like this have some kind of unique controls, and when you right-click them to get the contextual menus are also usually different. So you'll just have to experiment with these. I'll briefly go over some of the toggles and some of these other common options for you though. For toggles, this changes the way the object behaves in the world. Lock will lock it in place, and it means that it's no longer selectable through the normal means. You have to hold Control and click it. Toggle that on and off by right-clicking the object and bringing up the contextual menu here. Drag selectable means if you turn this off, you won't be able to drag select the object. Snap and grid means it will snap to those points, either snap points or grid points. If you turn that off, it won't snap to them. Auto raise means that when you pick this object up, it's not going to bring everything above it with it. Sticky means that when you pick up this object, anything that is on top of it will also go with the object that you picked up. Now I have hands. This changes whether or not this object can be placed into your player hands. Hide face down means that it's going to show a question mark for the bottom side of the card, except for when you peek at it. Reveal fog of war and ignore fog of war has to do with that fog of war zone we talked about earlier. This is one way of revealing it, is moving that object through a fog of war. If you toggle measure movement on, this is useful for miniatures games. It will measure the distance you're moving it as you move it. And if you ever decide you don't want to move it anymore, you want to put it back, you just hit escape. Next we have tooltip. If you turn this off, you just won't see a tooltip when you hover over it. Grid projection means when you turn the grid on, it will be projected over this object as well. And persistent means that when you load between saves and mods, this object, if this is selected on, this object will still be there. Then from there we have tags, which is used for scripting, changes the way it interacts with certain things. Save object allows you to load this into other mods. Color tint will change the tint, and now where this changes the tint at really heavily depends on the object and its textures. So like on cards, you're only going to apply that color tint to the edge of the card because the front and the back are pre-made textures. Physics will change the way it interacts with the physics settings. Flip, rotate, and scale we've already gone over. These are all other ways to do it. Scripting, you can add scripting to it here, and then clone, copy, and delete. So now that we've gone over all the tools and all the basic controls, we're going to go through the menus now. Hitting this back button will rewind time, and you can change how far back you want to go. Just keep in mind that when you use this, or Control Z does the same thing, it will reload everything in the mod. So be careful doing this if you have a weaker computer, or if you're using a mod that has a lot of assets loaded in, because it could go really slowly. Same with fast forward. The games menu, we've already been over. This is your classic games, DLC, workshop, and your saves and loads. The objects menu will bring up different types of objects. So in components, you can load in different types of preset components, or go to custom and make your own. Tables allows you to change the basic table that you're using. Backgrounds lets you change your backgrounds, and saved objects is where you would find all the objects that you've saved, so you can load them in any game you're playing. Next up is the music tab. Here, if you make a playlist, you can add it here, upload it, and you can play, use this just like an MP3 player, and it will play for everybody in the room. The notebook. Here, if the game has rules and they've been written into this tab, this is where you'll see them. Every player color also has their own private notebook where you can type notes here. When you close this, your notes will persist. You can open that back up and see them. Next up, the options menu. Here we have a lot of options. We're not going to go over all of these here, but we have info on the mod that you're in or using, server settings, default player permissions, customizable displayable grid with snapping points, and you can turn that on and off there as well. You can change the lighting and the physics settings, player hand settings. You can see if player turns are enabled and how they work. And lastly, game keys, if any are set for the mod. Modding, we're also not going to get into here, but this is where you would manage your uploads, do scripting, or add tags. Then we have the main menu here, resume configuration, etc. Main menu is how you go back to the main menu game. And then we've gone over these two buttons as well. The last few are chat. You can always click here to bring up the chat, or you can press enter or the tilde key, whatever starts the chat function on your computer. Down here we have notes. Some mods will have notes down here. You can edit them and click that to set them again. And then up in the top right, you'll have the players that are in the room here, their names, their Steam pictures, their avatars, and what kind of permissions they have. So you notice that when players join the room, everybody's assigned a seat, and they all have colors. You can change that by clicking your name up here and change color. You can see where each color is seated. So you can click on another color, and it'll take you to that seat. You can also change teams. This is important in certain kinds of games, and it'll display your team there. If you don't want to be on a team, you can turn that off. And the last button that I haven't gone over yet is the flip table button. This literally flips the table, makes a show of it as well. It's actually not going to work on this table that I have here, but it will ask you to confirm if you'd like to flip the table or not. Once you do, the only way to get everything back is to rewind time, though. So be careful with that. If there's ever anything else you wanted or need to know how to do in Tabletop Simulator, or if you want to dive deeper into what this platform can do, check out kb.tabletopsimulator.com. This has guides for almost everything on Tabletop Simulator, from your basic controls to advanced scripting aids. Lastly, I'm just going to go over troubleshooting really quick. Sometimes people will have trouble, particularly with mods not loading. There's a few ways to fix this. So the first step is to go up into the menu and configurations tab. Under your main game settings here, you'll have mod caching and mod threading. If you turn these off, close the configurations tab, go back to the main menu, and then go back to your games, try loading the workshop file again, the mod again. If that still doesn't work, close your game out completely and click on it in your Steam library. There will be a manage cogwheel there, and you can select properties, installed files, and from there you can verify the integrity of your game files. Now, if that doesn't work, you might need to either restart your computer or uninstall and reinstall Tabletop Simulator. But that's it for the basic tools and controls for Tabletop Simulator. Again, if there's anything else you need to know, go to kb.tabletopsimulator.com, which will be in the description below. Happy gaming!